Okay, so if you're happy, I'll kick off. Good morning, everyone. Bore da pawb. My name's Sian Bradley. I'll be chairing today's session. I'm from Housing Justice Cymru. I think there's a few more coming in, so let me just give it 2 ticks. Okay, let's go for it. This morning, we will find out how placemaking can create cohesive and vibrant communities and the way that community-led housing projects can get involved. Placemaking involves a holistic approach to the planning, the design and the development of spaces, adding social, economic and environmental and cultural value to development proposals, resulting in benefits which go way beyond physical characteristics. This session will explore the role that communities can play in the planning and delivering and the management of vibrant places. So the agenda for this morning, Aimee Felstead will kick off with the placemaking and co-housing communities. Aimee's talk will be interactive as well, so there'll be a chance to go into some Zoom breakout rooms, which is always fun. At 10:45, Katherine Quigley will talk about Oakfield, which is a neighbourhood with community at its roots. At 11:05, Jackson Moulding will discuss co-producing eco-friendly housing. And then at about 11:15, we'll have a Q&A session for around 15 minutes. So please think of some questions and get those in the chat. A bit of housekeeping. The session's recorded, as you've seen. Please mute your mics while speakers are presenting. Keep those cameras on because we want to see your faces. And please introduce yourself in the chat, network, ask questions. We want to hear it all. So kicking us off is Aimee Felstead. She's a PhD researcher at Sheffield University. Aimee's research looks at examples of urban co-housing, a type of community-led housing development with shared facilities to identify solutions and challenges for residents' participation in shared outdoor spaces. She has designed a tool for resident groups and designers to share design and management solutions for getting involved in their own shared outdoor spaces. In 2020, she was awarded the Young Researchers Award from the International Association of People Environment Studies Conference. Over to you, Aimee. Thank you.
Lovely, and thank you very much for that introduction. I'm just going to kick off by sharing my screen. There we go. Okay. Just going to, yeah, there we go. All right, well, good morning, everyone. And so today, this presentation, I'm just going to start off with, first of all, what is placemaking? I think that's the most important thing to start with. And then I'll give you a very brief overview of what I did in my research before we then go into a few activities to think about how you can do some placemaking in your own projects and neighbourhoods. So this is a lovely blurry picture of me, and this is me volunteering at some co-housing work days, which is one of the main things I did as part of my research project. And I was really interested in how co-housing residents did their own placemaking in their shared outdoor spaces. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But first of all, I thought we'd talk about what is placemaking. And to start with, then, I think we need to understand what's the difference between space and a place, which we use these words every day, but perhaps don't think about what they mean. And so space is really the kind of physical thing that we can measure, physical form. So it's the distance, the area, the volume. So we might say space is small, it's enclosed, it's expansive, it's 5 meters wide, or it's 10 meters wide. So it's something we can measure. Whereas when we talk about places, there's so much more than the space. They're everything else that goes in it, including the people. So places are recognizable locations, they're used by people, and they also have a kind of special meaning to us. We feel connected to places. So we can say things like, this is my favorite place to sit, or this is a good place to meet people, or let's meet at that place where they sell the really good donuts. And then I'm going to suggest actually that you look at this website, which is really useful, which is Project for Public Spaces, because we want to think about, okay, so we know what places are, what makes a good place. And this diagram here is really useful because it highlights all the different things that go into making a good place. But roughly speaking, places should be somewhere where we can meet people, talk to them, socialize. We should be able to have lots of different uses and activities going on all at once. They should be comfortable. We want to sit there. They're a nice place to be. And we should be able to get to them easily and be able to walk through them easily. So really, placemaking is just about making great places, the process that we go through to make these good places. Now, going back to this picture, this is in Sheffield, where I'm based at the moment. And this is a place that I really like to go to on the weekend. It's called Kelham Island. It's got lots of good bars, restaurants, places to eat. And when I think about what is it that actually makes this a good place, well, first of all, it's got all these kind of industrial buildings that were probably built more than 100 years ago. The bar owners have put up this kind of sail so that it either creates shade in the summer, or this was actually just when we were coming outside of lockdown, where we could only be outside. So if it was going to rain, it's still going to be a comfortable place to be. We've got the artist in the background who's done this lovely graffiti of a greyhound eating some hobnobs. And we've got some kind of bit of DIY furniture, a cushion to make it comfortable. And then lastly, we've got all the people there, which adds to that sense of place. It kind of creates that liveliness, that hubbub, and it attracts you to want to go in and sit down there, and something we miss so much during lockdown. And of course the palm tree, so it feels like you're on holiday when you can't be. So the thing I'm trying to highlight here is actually there wasn't a single architect or landscape architect involved in making this place, but there was lots of different people who all added to making this a great place to be. And here we have another place. This is from my co-housing research. And again, none of this was designed by an architect or a landscape architect, but it was a great place for residents to come together and sit and have a cup of tea, to do plants and plants for their allotment. And so over these next couple of slides, I'm going to show you some examples of placemaking by co-housing residents, and talk a little bit about how you can make these places a great place to be very easily. And I'll also show you some examples where an architect and landscape architect has been involved. So my research question was, what enables residents to get involved in shared outdoor spaces? Because getting the people who use spaces involved in them is one way of making a really good place. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with co-housing, but if you're not, it's a type of housing, community-led housing development, where everyone has their own private home and shared facilities, such as a common house, where you'd have things like shared kitchen or shared laundry facilities. And often all the outdoor spaces are kind of a shared garden as well. And in co-housing, residents tend to be really highly involved in the design and maintenance and use of all the outdoor spaces. So here, I visited 4 sites across the UK, and I did that by volunteering on some of the work days, interviewing residents and designers. And then during the pandemic, when I couldn't carry on visiting, some of the residents did some video diaries for me, and of course, phone and Zoom interviews that we're getting so used to. So this first photo actually wasn't one of the sites I visited, but I wanted to show you it because it's now a really well-known example of co-housing, and it's Marmalade Lane co-housing in Cambridge, which is one of the newer developments and one of the biggest co-housing developments, I think, in the UK. And I wanted to show you this because it contrasts with quite a lot of the examples I went to see, because this is an example of quite like a highly designed landscape, where the architects and landscape architects have designed a lot of it themselves with the involvement of residents. And what they've done is, what you see in front of you is the private front gardens of people's homes. which residents have personalised with plant pots, a place to hang their washing, a place for children to play. And then on the right-hand side is what we call the kind of central green, which is the shared outdoor space where people come together for, to meet, for events, for meetings. And I think a key thing that makes this place really work as co-housing is there's not much separation between people's front gardens and their shared space. And what that allows for is it's really easy to interact with your neighbours, say hello as they pass by. You can see the person standing on the top of the stairs there. And as we spoke about before, being able to socialise and interact with people is a really important part of placemaking. So that's what the designer has done on this project to make it a good place. And then by contrast, going back to this photo, we see where an architect or landscape architect hasn't been involved. This was all designed by the residents. And they did this they got some greenhouses for free off Free Cycle as a place to, I think, their tomatoes in there to grow tomatoes. The path they created from materials they already had on the site. And then they created this small meeting place underneath the birch tree, which was a kind of a place to have tea break on work days. And all of that was from found furniture. So it was free, cheap and easy. And then that is surrounded by their allotment garden. And then finally in the background, you can see what I've called the wilderness, which is a wooded area that they actually didn't do anything to, they just left. So they've created this place by doing nothing. And it was really important for residents that they did that because they have badgers living there, and being able to watch the fox come and go and stuff like that was a really important part. And I just want to say as well, this is in the middle of the city. You perhaps wouldn't think it. These little arrows that you see everywhere are me starting to highlight some of these placemaking ideas as part of my research. So another example here is in co-housing, a lot of the space, as I said before, is shared. It's all about social interaction, meeting people. But actually, residents also wanted a space where they could just be on their own. So one of the residents with really good carpentry skills made this kind of pergola bench space to be a place where residents could just have a cup of tea, read a book, and just kind of have some quiet time to be on their own. This is another example where one of the first things residents did was create this orchard. I think they're mostly apple trees, and that's because for them growing apples and produce was important for them. But also it became a kind of annual tradition where all the children and residents would come together and pick the apples on a kind of harvest day, and they'd kind of bake things with them. And then this middle central grassy space would be a place for either children to play in, but also to have picnics and, celebrations and traditions. And this is an example where you can kind of have multiple activities and uses within one space. This I quite like. This is a bit of placemaking from the children who live there. This is this kind of wooded wilderness space where the children would play. It actually became a learning resource where some of the children learned how to climb trees. They learned to name some of the plants. They started to find out there's birds nesting there. But also they had this broken slide, so they kind of dragged it into the wood, and you can't quite see from this photo, but it's like kind of a downhill slope. And so they've been able to repurpose the slide so it still works going down this slope. Then we have this example here, which actually all this placemaking really is having an annual event. And this group did this for several reasons. They had this bonfire night every year as a way of kind of recognizing what they'd achieved that year in terms of the their co-housing development, the renovations they were doing on their houses. But it was also a chance to interact with their neighbours. So it is almost became a bit of a public event. Family and friends were invited, and the neighbours came round and had a shared meal. And it was a really kind of important part of the calendar. They have since then decided, to begin with, this is also a good way of getting rid of all this material that came out of the renovation, but they've since decided that all the kind of pollution and smoke made from this was impacting on some of the residents' health, and it obviously perhaps wasn't good for the area. So they're now rethinking how they can carry on this tradition, but maybe having something different from the bonfire. So I've just seen this, perhaps some things coming up in the chat, so I'll have a look at those in a second. So lastly, then perhaps if you're at the designing stage or the planning stage of your project, the ways co-housing residents did this was by trying to visualize their design in lots of different ways. So for example, just reading a plan, people might interpret that differently, and actually you're talking about totally different things. So being able to look at photos and examples, being able to use models, or mocking things up at a one-to-one scale helps residents kind of visualize what the plan and vision for the space is going to be. And these balloons at the bottom are actually residents, they're helium balloons, and they're trying to mass out how big the buildings are going to be on their site so they can visualize how tall they're going to be. And actually all of this work was done with an architect or a landscape architect. So you might want to think about whether you want to work with a designer and what they can do for you. And first of all, they can be a technical advisor. So it might be about doing some detailed construction drawings, suggesting sustainable materials, or they can perhaps tell you how to meet certain like sustainable standards and BREEAM standards. But also you might want them to be a bit more of a group facilitator, so to facilitate these kind of workshops so that you can be a bit more involved in the design process. So that's something you'd probably want to agree with the architect in advance, because they will make sure they budget a certain amount of money for these workshops. And finally, they can act as a kind of go-between between you and the planning department or conservation officer or any other body that you need to work with. Okay, see, yeah. So from all those visits that I showed you, I identified 72 different ways that residents actually got involved in placemaking. And I'm not going to read them all out to you, but it's just to show that the way you do placemaking happens in lots of different ways. It can happen through developing a vision and going through that design process. It can be about making decisions as a group. It's about creating and maintaining those spaces in the long term. It's how you use those spaces, what kind of activities go on there. And then how do you work with other people outside your group? How do you involve your neighbours, your family and friends, or maybe local organisations? It's the design of spaces, and it's also maybe about working with a designer. So, I'll just go back one. I put all of those ideas onto a card, so it could become a card game. And the idea is that each one of these ideas maybe you can combine them together to help prompt and think of new ideas for placemaking in your space. And I've trialed this a couple of times with the co-housing groups I work with, which is the picture you see here. And you can see them thinking of lots of ideas that they're writing down on post-it notes. And today we're going to maybe have a go at a different version of this. Obviously, we can't quite sit around a picnic table together and hold a pack of cards each, unfortunately, but we are going to have a go at thinking about this on something called Google Jamboard. And I'm just going to switch my screen now so you can see that. Okay. So I think in a minute you'll be sent a link to this. But before you come to Google Jamboard, it's just a kind of interactive whiteboard page. And you don't need a Google account and you don't need to be signed in. If you prefer to sign out, you can do that by clicking in the top right-hand corner and sign out, and then everything will be anonymous. And what I'm just going to ask you to do when you get sent this link is just to introduce yourself. So if you click on the left-hand side on the sticky note thing, you can perhaps type in that you're, I don't know, a co-housing project with shared garden space. I click save and then cancel because it's prompting prompting you to fill in the next one. You'll then see you've made this sticky note, and then you can place it in the appropriate stage. So if you're you've not started your project yet, you're just wanting to form a group at this stage, you know, put your sticky note at this side. If you're already living on site, you know, at the other end of things, or you're living in your neighborhood, you can put it on this side, and I'll read some of them out so we can just get to know everyone. So the link is in the chat. I can see a lot of you in there already. Great. Okay, so examples we've got someone who works with social housing, tenants across Wales at the early stage. I'm hoping lots of people are just typing out their sticky notes at the moment. We've got 16 people in here at the moment, which is great. If anyone's having trouble with the sticky notes, they're just over to the left-hand side here. We've got Sharon, who's chairing this session, and she's working as an architect and coordinating the Housing Justice, Faith and Affordable Housing project. We've got Kat, who will be speaking later. So she's interested in the kind of building stage phase of the housing project. Great, we've got lots coming in now. So I'll just let you move those onto the appropriate stage so I can read some of that. Okay, lovely. So we've got someone who wants to start a group in the village that they live in. So that you're sort of at the group stage, but you're also living it. It's kind of a live project at the same time. We've got some co-housing, which is lovely. And we've got Claire White, monitoring and evaluation officer. Lots and lots coming in. Bridge Farm at the planning stage. Okay, that's a really exciting stage then. So you're perhaps currently designing at the moment, trying to get planning permission. Okay. Working with local authorities with social tenants. Great. So thinking about how can we get placemaking involved in that. Lovely. Okay, we've got tons there. So what I'm seeing from this is a lot of you really at an early stage at the moment, which is great because you can just be thinking, even at this early stage, how will we do, you know, what kind of placemaking ideas can we include? And perhaps how will you do the kind of design stage? And how will you involve people in the placemaking in the long term? Okay, lovely. Okay, so now, if you look at the top of the screen, there's some boxes and arrows, and you can click along to the next frame, just like this. And hopefully you can all get onto the next activity. We've got some budding artists also on this page. Okay, so here I want us to think a little bit now about what kind of shared spaces you have and what are the vision for those. So even if you're a really early stage, you might be thinking, for example, in your village, you really want to create, I don't know, a small park space. You want to create a space where you can have your village fete. It might be about creating a safe place for children to play. So if you start filling in those post-it notes again, we can get a bit of an idea of the different visions you guys have for your shared spaces. So great, we've got some growing spaces, organic fruit and veg. And maybe we're thinking about sustainability and decarbonisation, which I know is a big thing at the moment. Everyone's trying to sort of meet zero carbon. So how can we involve sustainability in placemaking? Growing spaces, okay, I'm going to put those two together. I think growing food and eating food is a really great way of bringing people together. Incredible Edible, which again is about growing food in public spaces, such as a football pitch. Lovely. sharing meals and learning new skills. So it could just be about having this flexible space to bring people together for different activities. Children to play and older people to relax. Yeah, I think that's a lovely idea, to bring the different generations together. How do you create a safe place for that? Roads and cars are always the kind of challenge for that. Community gardens, food, play space, fire pit. Oh, that sounds great. Pizza oven, tasty. Spaces for nature and learning. I like that. Perhaps put that kind of with the one with the children. Allocated community house. Okay, so we've got a challenge here. Funding, always a huge challenge. And that actually leads us on quite nicely to our next activity. So we've got orchards, communities, chickens. Yeah, chickens always bring a lot of fun to a space, I think. Growing space, market square. I think that's a lovely idea, actually. Markets can really activate and create a great space. So I'm going to ask you now just to come back to the Zoom session, finish off your note and come back to the Zoom. And I will introduce the next activity, which will be in the breakout rooms. It's really good. Just to mention as well, actually, that these slides at the end, I can make a PDF of them, and we can share them around by email afterwards. So you can come back to these slides later on. Okay, so I hope you're all back in the Zoom session now. And you should be able to see on the screen that you will be taken next into breakout rooms, and you'll be sent a new link to a new Jamboard, and so you'll each have your own Jamboard in your group. And the first activity then, which is should be fairly simple, I think, is to think about what are the challenges for placemaking. So someone mentioned funding, which is obviously a big challenge, so that might be something you want to mention. It could be about decision making as a group. It could be about any conflicts that you're having with other groups in the area. So yeah, just write those on post-it notes as a group, and then we'll come back and I'll just ask you to feedback some of the challenges. And I think we'll be split out into breakout rooms imminently.
Stay with me, let me just pause the recording.
Thank you.
And we should all go fingers crossed.
I'm used to using Teams rather than Zoom. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, bro. I can't see anybody now because I'm on full screen. I don't know if there was a way I could change that. But if you can't hear me or see slides, if somebody could let me know, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. As Sian said, I'm Kat Quigley. I'm part of the social investment team at Nationwide, and I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about our eco-friendly neighbourhood with community at its roots. So it's 239 houses that we're building on a brownfield site in an area of East Swindon that is in need of regeneration, about 3 kilometres away from our head office. We're providing 30% affordable homes available through shared ownership and affordable rent. I guess, you know, I'm here in a sort of slightly different capacity to some of you today, but just wanted to offer the perspective really that I think lots of non-traditional house builders should be building, whether that's community groups or other kind of responsible businesses. And I think as long as we all kind of keep community at the heart of those developments, then they should be successful. Before I talk about our approach to engagement and involvement in this project, I just thought we'd do a quick trip back in time so I could tell you a little bit about Nationwide Building Society so that you can all understand, I guess, the kind of values that the society is built on, and hence why we're doing this project. So very much we were built on a social purpose rather than a commercial one, and that stands today. So we have members rather than shareholders. So we cast our minds back to a pub in Birmingham in 1775. So the story goes that a landlord and regulars came together and decided that if they put a penny into a pint pot at the end of every week, that they would soon have enough for somebody to buy a home, and then the next person, and they'd keep going till everybody was able to build a home of their own. And that was kind of the genesis of the building society movement, really. And I think the foreparents to Nationwide, or what we now know as Nationwide, came sometime in the 1800s, and we've still kept very firm to those kind of values of bringing people together. We were involved in Letchworth Garden City. After both World Wars, we were involved in kind of community build-back projects. And most of you will probably know us for our kind of mortgages and saving products. Actually, in 2006 or 7, our members voted for us to be able to invest 1% of our pre-tax profits every year in doing social good. So part of that goes to the Nationwide Foundation, which is a separate charity, but with the same aims of focused on sort of tackling the housing emergency. Some of you will know them, and I'm very grateful that I get to work with them on some things that are rather amazing. And then we have some internal programs. So we have a community grants program where we have pledged to fund £22 million over 5 years to housing charities and organisations across the UK who are looking at tackling different areas of the housing emergency. That's still running and it's going into its 5th year. We have funded various community land trusts and community-led housing projects. So if there is something that's of interest to anybody here today, let me know afterwards and I can send you a link so you can find out more and see whether it would be something worth applying for next year. We do grants of up to £50,000. So bringing it back to Oakfield then, Oakfield has been an opportunity for us as Nationwide to kind of test and learn, to look at what we could find out by getting involved in a project like this and what we could share with others to encourage people to do more. We have focused the project on a number of principles. I think Sean summed it up quite nicely in the introduction. So community has been massively important for us, quality, sustainability, some others as well. But what I really wanted to focus on today was how we've focused on including the community every step of the way of the project and the success that that has had for us. So I thought it'd be useful if I talked through our approach, 3 of the kind of main points to the approach that we took. It's probably worth saying we're in the construction phase now, so we've been building for just over a year. Sorry, excuse me. With our show home opening in January and then people moving in, hopefully our first residents moving in April, which is incredibly exciting. So I'm going to go back to when we started reaching out to the community, so pre-pandemic. And these are some of the kind of 3 key learnings, I guess, I'd say that we've had from our approach and some of the things that we're really proud of and feel that have delivered really well for this project. So I wanted to talk about engaging widely and reaching out to people who wouldn't normally engage with this type of project. We know that people tend not to engage with the way that planning is set up at the moment. We were inspired by, and I've forgotten who it is, and it's been on the tip of my tongue all morning, so if anybody knows, let me know, but we were inspired by a London community housing group who had been using a community organiser, and we wanted to see how that would work for our project. So we hired wonderful Keith Brown, who you can see in some of these pictures, to come and be a community organiser for Oakfield. So for 18 months before we put in our planning application, Keith got to know the community and helped us as Nationwide and our design team connect to the community. So he literally would knock on doors and get to know people, find out what their hopes and aspirations were for the community, what things they were worried about and what they hope to see Oakfield deliver for them. He would get to know people in the queue for the fish and chip shop. He'd go to coffee mornings. We soon realised that actually it was really helpful for him to have a base close by. So he had been based in our office, and we actually found him a little space in a community centre so that people could go to him as well as him being out and about. think what really struck us about the work that Keith did, just opening up and giving us the opportunity to speak to people who probably wouldn't have come along to a traditional consultation. I can remember Keith spoke to somebody who directly opposite one of our boundaries at some council homes, and Keith had knocked on somebody's door one day and said, you know, can we talk to you about this? And this person had said, oh, but I live in a council house, why would you want to hear from me? And I think that really struck us and spurred us on to make sure that we were creating a communications approach or involvement approach that everybody felt that they had a valid and listened to voice. And I think because of that, we've managed to create something that's really rich and well considered because of that spectrum of people that have been involved. I know I spoke to another lady who said she'd lived in the area for 25 or 30 years and nobody had ever asked her opinion on what mattered to her in the community. So I think reaching out far and wide has been really important to us, as well as Keith doing everything that he has done to connect people. We did lots of consultations. You can see some of the images here. We used some of our own nationwide branches. We went to community centres. We did pop-up events outside children's soft plays and things like that. We went into schools. We thought quite carefully about varying times of the day, days of the week, putting on children's activities just to make sure that we appealed to a range of different people. We also made sure that people could engage with us online if they didn't want to or couldn't come to face-to-face events. And we also made sure that we were available for people who couldn't come but would like that face-to-face experience. Keith would go and see them, or me and my team would pop into people's homes to keep them updated. So in that way, we worked in a really kind of iterative way with our design team to take people's ideas and then keep sharing those until we got to a point that everybody felt really comfortable with, which is why we kind of developed this mantra really, which is listen first, design second. So we really made sure that the design team took in everything that the community were telling us they wanted and needed before, you know, pen was put to paper to create something. And I think the designs that we've come up with answer that community brief quite well. So there are just a few points that I was going to highlight through some of these pictures, which I'm really excited about because they're new and they really bring to life, hopefully, what we'll all be able to see in a few months' time. So this large picture here, it's a bit similar to Marmalade Lane, actually, that Aimee showed us earlier. Some of the houses will have smaller gardens. You can see they've got some high fencing just outside their homes, and then low fences leading on to shared gardens where we hope people will grow together, spend time together. And I think one of the main things that struck us during that community exercise was that people really wanted somewhere where they could see that sense of community. I can remember Tina, who was on the last slide, saying to me she just wanted to put the heart back into the community, and that people were desperate for these spaces where they can come together. So we've over-indexed in the scheme of places, outdoor places where people can meet. We've got a playground that was designed by some of the local children. We've got an outdoor amphitheatre to encourage people to have community events. We've also got a small indoor community space as well that we hope people use in a variety of ways. Another thing that was really interesting, I'm sorry, can you tell that I've got the end of a bit of a cold at the moment? Something else that was really interesting to us during that consultation phase was this idea that people had about older and younger people living together side by side. In that area, we see lots of generations of the same family tend to stay in the same area. People were wanting housing that supported that. So the picture in the top left here, this is an age-in-place home. So it's a house that's easily adaptable for people as their needs may change as they get older, so they can move the bedroom downstairs. Lots of different ways to help them stay in their home for longer and as part of the community. We'll also be creating walk-up apartments, so homes where you have a flat on the bottom for an older person and then a flat on the top for a younger person. And we're making sure that they're spread out across the community as well. One of the other things that came about through conversations with the community is that of course, people want to be treated with parity and equity, regardless of how you may come to live in Oakfield. So whether that's because you're buying a home or you're a tenant, through whichever way, and we know that that's not always the case on other schemes. So we've made sure that the scheme is completely tenure blind, so the houses look exactly the same, they're mixed across the site. We've also made sure that our affordable rented homes will come with all white goods and carpets as well. And then as this community starts to form, we'll have a residents management committee, which will be made up of anybody who lives on Oakfield and run by some of the residents to make sure that the estate is managed in the right way. And regardless of what tenure you are, you'll have a part to play in that. And finally on this, the picture at the bottom, I'm not sure how well it depicts it actually, but there was a real emphasis for not having cars over people, and that people should be able to use the space to come together, to meet each other. So going back to some of those bits around kind of neighbourliness and bringing the community together. Very much at Oakfield, while there will be some cars, we're encouraging people to focus on active travel, outdoor time together. And of course, there were some considerations, practical considerations really. So there was concern from residents that the scheme could potentially cause a bit of a rat run. So we've made sure that we've looked at how we're creating roads to avoid that. There is a high incidence of antisocial behaviour in the area. So we've made sure that pathways are well lit and the parkland and playground is overlooked so that it can be used in the way that it's been intended rather than for anything else. I just wanted to talk a bit about keeping people connected. So we're focused on how we keep people connected to the scheme as it continues. I guess it sometimes feels like we went through planning and then it's taken a while to get things going, and there's been lots of building, but people maybe couldn't see much, and there's been a pandemic. So we've really focused on how we could keep people connected to what was happening so they feel connected and included in it. So we do regular newsletters, we are in touch with the schools and do lots of things with the children. You can see here Keith has gone on to train community organisers in the area who are now using those skills in a variety of ways. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were able to set up a community response scheme, so we were able to grant £100,000 to about 26 different charities who really needed that support. And we keep in touch and involve the local community that you can see on the right hand side here, Melanie and Zamzam at an event we had on site a couple of weeks ago in their hard hats. My attention is starting to turn to how we make sure that the community, the new residents when they move in next year, can connect with the existing communities, how they can set themselves up for success. We will have a nationwide colleague who will be on site for the first couple of years, who can help with moving in, to help to get some of those community groups and activities set up. I'm really interested in how we can support that community and how we bring older and younger people together and how we can support those kind of community spaces. I know that some of you will probably have some good ideas on that, and I'd be really interested to hear more from you on that. So I think my final thing is just to say, as Nationwide, we're committed to sharing our learnings from this project. We're creating what we're calling chapters of a blueprint as we go along. We've done one on our approach to community involvement, so a bit more of a kind of step-by-step and detailed version of what I've spoken to you about today. So if anybody would like that, let me know. I can pop a link in the chat in a minute actually. And as I said, we're always interested in learning too. So if any of you have experience or thoughts on the kind of community formation piece and have time for a cup of tea, a virtual cup of tea or something, then please do let me know. I will pass back to Sian now. I'm very happy to take any questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. It's really interesting, especially to see a community project on such a big scale. 200 odd houses is nothing to be sniffed at. So yeah, it's really commendable and great to see Nationwide are leading the way in this kind of project. So thanks very much. As Kat said, yeah, please do get your questions into the chat. We'll move on now to Jackson Moulding. Kat, if you wouldn't mind, stop sharing your screen and we'll let Jackson come in. Thank you. So Jackson's been working in the field of community-led housing for over 19 years. He's got a background in environmental sustainability, energy efficiency and renewable energy. Jackson moved into the area of group self-build projects through his involvement in the creation of Ashley Vale self-build scheme of 40 homes in Bristol. He became one of the founding members in 2008 and was vice chair of the National Custom and Self-Build Association, and for 8 years was raising the profile of community-led self-build sector in the national and local government, as well as the traditional housing industry. In 2010, Jackson led the setup of Bristol Community Land Trust and became the self-finished development manager of its inaugural development of 12 affordable homes. Jackson has also led on the SNUG Home programme, a customisable self-finish modular eco home aimed at providing more affordable routes for low carbon and low impact homes. Earlier this year, the project won the William Sutton Prize for Sustainability and Placemaking, recognising the innovative concept and design for developing successful and sustainable communities. Thank you, Jackson.
Hi, I'm just struggling to actually share my screen. It's coming up with oh dear, hang on. I just see why that's not working.
Whilst Jackson gets on with that, it's just to say that Amy's had to dash off back to teaching at Sheffield. She's provided her email address, so if you've got any more questions around her work.
I think I might just need to leave and reopen. Hold on a second, sorry.
Okay.
Hang on.
Everybody, did anybody want to raise any questions in the meantime?
I'd like to say thank you to Kat for her presentation. It was really interesting. And I think building these kind of houses is really important, and community-led is really important. But the industry has shown that we can do these things. It's great that Nationwide's doing it. We can do these things. The problem is land. We need to make sure that land is in the control of the community, and then they can release it on their terms for their agreed use, agreed development. We can't leave it to the planning system. And this is as someone who is a planner, because the land system is corrupt. The planning system cannot manage the quality of development. That's
okay. I'm back in, but it says host a disabled participant screen showing. So I don't know if that needs turning on again.
There you go, you should be able to.
Oh yeah, great. Great, thank you. I'm sorry, not quite sure what happened there. Can you all see that? Yep,
yes.
Great. Okay. Right. Thank you. Yeah, that's an amazing introduction. Thanks so much. Yeah, my name's Jackson, and I've been involved in different forms of community-led housing for the last 20 years, I guess. I was part of this project, which is the Ashley Vale self-build project in Bristol. And I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. I couldn't afford a house in Bristol, but I could afford to buy a plot, and I built my own place, which led me on to this whole sort of thought process around why do we continue to build housing in the way it's built, and why are we not building more, putting residents in the driving seat more so, just because the homes and the places that are created are just so much more fantastic, and the empowerment that comes through that for the people that live there. So we do know that there is a desire for a different way. And there's been various sort of studies done show that 74% of people would not want to buy a volume product of volume house builders. we've got to deal with climate change ASAP. We've got COP26. We'll see how that impacts onto a housing sector. And a large number of people would like to be involved in building their own home. On top of that, we've got a huge or a growing affordable housing need as well. So more and more people getting left behind off the housing market. We set up Ecomotive in 2008 as a workers' cooperative, so we could try and find a way to support other projects or other people that wanted to do projects. And we kept finding all these hurdles all the time, either planning hurdles or financial hurdles or government policy hurdles. And so we've went through a series of, okay, what sort of organisations are needed to try and address those things? And we were part of the team that set up NAXPA, which has gone on to try and get policy change and has led lots of debates that sort of included number 10 and getting the housing ministers on board to start supporting self-build and the broader context of community-led housing. And we've also gone in locally, helping set up community land trusts and those sort of things, which are inherently part of the solution, which, you know, at a local level, how do you get projects going which embrace both the affordability and the community involvement? A lot of the things that we started exploring was, well, what is the solution? Because even large projects, which are, you know, even like the self-build that I was involved in, still required a significant, you know, amount of money. And the idea of people-led stuff kind of goes across the board, from large-scale, expensive co-housing projects right down to bottom level of homeless people sort of being supported to build tiny houses. And this was a project I visited in America, and where homeless people were supported in building like these tiny little buildings, which was incredibly empowering for them. Right through to tiny houses in Japan. So this issue around housing is not just UK, it's not just Wales, it's pretty much everywhere. There's a differential between those that can have a roof over their heads and those that can't. The other part that we talk about around community is the involvement process, and that was a real integral part of what we did in the Ashley Vale project. And so when we set up the Bristol Community Land Trust, we really wanted to embrace the idea of self-finish. So we did 12 homes in Bristol, which were delivered through self-finish, and all the residents took part in completing their homes. And it was a really fantastic way for those residents to get to know each other before they moved in. And then they also then felt that their homes really belonged to them, even though 5 of the 12 were affordably rented and 7 of them were shared ownership. Everyone felt that they belonged and that was their space, because they'd all worked on each other's houses. We've also recently, this is just another, I just wanted to show this project, which is the Bridge Farm project, which is also in Bristol, which we saw came up for sale. And as a community, we thought we can't let that go to the private developers. And so we bought that in community. So that's we're still on the process. We, you know, even though we've done a few projects already, we're still coming up against the barriers and the how you get consensus, how you get the right decision for that site. Yeah, every site's different, every group of people's different, all the desires and interests from everyone, and how do you make a project really work for that site? There's no one solution for everything. And the idea of self-finish has played out further for another project we're doing in Bristol, which is a 50-home affordable housing scheme, which is alive at the moment. I'm going back up on site tomorrow. We've been supporting 75 residents to get up to speed with fitting kitchens and their skirting and decorating and tiling. And that's a really steep learning curve for everybody. It's been quite a sort of nerve-wracking process for them, working out what their quality is, how to work together, dealing with frustrations and emotions. But that journey creates a very strong sense of place by the time you get to the end. So we're in the kind of the sort of, I guess you call it the site muddle at the moment, where, you know, it's clear for us, but the residents are kind of trying to find their way through it. but it's very exciting, and lots of them are really have been empowered through the process. But what we are finding is that there is there's a bit we're still missing, which is the idea that the whole home could be built by the residents. And the idea of self-build in its entirety generally falls to those people that have got a bit of money to do it. You know, the general higher percentage of self-build houses is generally retired people that've got a house that they can sell, they've got some money. Most self-build magazines are sold to people that are in that sort of age bracket. Whereas there's a growing group of people that are much lower down who just want to use self-build or self-finish as a way to put on their head for themselves and their family. Have a training space that could support people to do that, and maybe bring in some of the ideas of the tiny house movement, where we could build modules that could then come together to create a home that met those aspirations of affordability and very strong sustainability. And so we came up with this idea of the SNUG home. The idea has been built off-site, and we were looking for various bits of funding. I'd like to have a chat with you again, Kat, at some point, because we actually applied to Nationwide twice and you guys turned us down. So it'd be great to come back to you at some point, see if there was any further support. So we designed a low energy home, and we set up a pop-up factory in Bristol, and it's been incredibly exciting, apart from we did most of our build during COVID, which was quite tricky. We had to do obviously keeping everyone safe and trying to try and keep the training space going, but obviously having to keep everyone separated. And then as COVID lifted, we could then start having more integrated forms of training. But you can see this sort of module being part built in the background. This is a bit more of some of our training and workday sessions. We've involved quite a lot of different community members, from local residents to people from wider across Bristol who've got an interest in sustainable housing and interest in tiny housing and wanted to come and get involved. Did lots of little sessions talking about insulation, different types of insulation, air tightness. You can see some denim insulation there under that window, which was recycled denim jeans. We used denim insulation and recycled newspaper for the build, and triple glazed windows. We built the modules in one part of Bristol, an area, quite a deprived area in Bristol, and it was really great having local residents being involved in the build. And then we picked up the 4 modules, we took them across Bristol, and we put them in another site. Now, this other site, we didn't go for the tiny house route because we wanted to create a home that was of a decent size, but we did look at building a house that was the smallest house we could get away with in relation to building regulations and planning. And so we built a 44 square meter home, which is a bit larger than the space standards, which is 37 square meters. But we had a challenge because we built it over 2 stories, and there's no planning definition for a 1-person dwelling over 2 stories. So we had a battle with the planners. The planners turned us down, but we got unanimous decision by the planning committee to support what we were doing, which was really great. We had no objections to the planning. We had 70 letters of support. So it was like, yeah, we need to start looking at a different way of delivering housing. That's what we ended up building. It's looks like a spaceship has just landed. Like it's the lighting, but it's we're really pleased with what we've come up with. It's got a solar assisted heat pump. It's got an MVHR system. It's triple glazed. It's super insulated. It's airtight, and it was built by lots of members of the community. And we've got an Afghan woman living in there now, supported by the City Council's housing resettlement team. We've painted the timber behind the timber. So we've got these beautiful colours that sit there, and they're all the colours of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that was quite fun doing that. And as you see the houses, you can kind of choose which is your favorite sustainable development goal. So if you ever come to visit it, go and find which one's yours. So a few stats just of what we've done. We actually met, amazingly, even though it was 4 modules, we met the Passive House standard for air tightness. It is super insulated. We were measuring the embodied energy of the build. We need to really think in relation to the sustainability and COP26, how we address not just the energy performance of the home at completion, but also the energy consumed in its construction. We also need to think about how those residents are empowered to live maybe a more considerate lifestyle once they and for it to be easy for them to have a considerate lifestyle. So all the community-led housing projects are great because they provide means of sharing resources, etc. Though this is a one-off house because it's our trial house. There's a quick picture internally of the home. And this is the ground floor. So it's one room downstairs with a little toilet area behind that sort of curved door. And then upstairs is one room for the bedroom with a little ensuite shower. And we've been bowled over actually because we've already won a number of awards, and we've become finalists in 2 others which we haven't been announced yet, so that's really exciting. And we are now looking for a larger space that we can do some production. We won the William Sutton Prize that provided some finance to help us try and set up a larger space. It's not a huge amount, but we do want to set up a new space. Warehouses in a city are incredibly expensive, and the big pension funds keep going around and buying them all. So if you've got a big warehouse or you've got a large farm that you want to use for a production and training space, then get in touch. Or if you know somewhere where that might be good. And I think that's it. I kind of whistled through that because I didn't know how long it was going to take. I think I might be at time. So yeah, get in touch if you want to talk about any of those projects or that's it from me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jackson. I think the theme that has kind of come across all 3 presentations has really been that whilst there are really serious topics around sustainability and sociability around these projects, that actually the theme is that they're just really fun, and that quite a lot of the time we get bogged down in the seriousness of this industry, but actually you're creating really fun places for people to live and to learn as they're producing them. So really great stuff. So has anybody got any questions that they want to ask now directly to Jackson or Kat?
A quick one, if I may. Light. It looked like there weren't many windows. How did you manage light for these?
Are you talking about the SNUG or Kat's project?
Yeah.
The SNUG.
Sorry.
Yeah. So we did actually have. I didn't show a view of the other side. There's some big French windows on the ground floor. The side we were looking at was the east and the south. Now, in energy performance modeling, the size of the windows actually has an impact on the energy loss. So there's this sort of balance between light and energy loss in a building. Obviously, the most energy efficient building, you wouldn't have any windows, but that's not that fun. Though I have seen a house with no windows in Almere, a large self-built project in Holland. But yeah, it is actually incredibly light, amazingly, in the SNUG. There's a decent amount of windows that work in it. So, but yeah, it is an interesting balance between those 2 aspects.
Brilliant. Leonie, I saw that earlier you had a question around the tenure blind setup that Oakfield have arranged. I'm not sure did Kat answer that in the chat or not, but I think it's always a really interesting topic when it comes to planning sites and being able to sort of peppercorn them around the site. How have you overcome that issue there, Kat?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we're learning as we go, and the sort of pepper potting across the site has been really important to us in terms of how that worked as part of the planning. I'm not the right person to be answering the question on that, but I think it's something that we have felt is really important, and we do want to create that feeling of parity for everybody, regardless of how they're coming to Oakfield, to kind of feel equally part of that.
Yeah, I guess my question was, does that mean that people who do bring equity are compromised in the amount of space they can have? Or as one way of putting it, I mean, does that mean that you can somehow find the funding to build, you know, good sized spaces? Because the guidelines for affordable houses, the ones I've seen, are really quite small, and, you know, it needs really creative design for people to have spaciousness around them. Have you found a solution to that? Because that would be amazing.
I don't know if we've got a solution to that on the design as such, but I think because we're a not-for-profit project, what's enabled us to do that probably other house builders don't do is look at how we use that space in the right way, rather than saying how many houses can we fit into one particular area.
So is it possible to see like the plans that you've developed?
Yeah, sure, I can certainly share something with you, of course.
That'd be brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
will do.
It sounds like you two need that cup of coffee via Zoom
Yeah.
to get into it, so it was great. Stephanie Bolt has asked a couple of questions, but one of them is a really good one for Jackson here around retrofitting into council housing. Does the SNUG model really, can that be applied to retrofit projects, or have you just used it as new build at the moment?
Yeah, so the SNUG model per se is about new build offsite using like the sort of modern methods of construction. However, we are talking with our local neighbourhood trust, who are looking at routes to retrofit existing housing stock. It wouldn't be the SNUG model, but we were looking at how could we provide use the training facility to bring local residents up to speed in the same way as a self-finish. So can residents be supported to undertake some of the retrofit works, who could then become a team that could go around doing more homes? So almost like could be a pathway to work, or it could be just skilling up and empowerment, and then finding ways that those volunteer teams could then do some of that work. Yeah, it is the most critical thing that we need to be looking at, as much as we need to have empowered communities. Well, we need to have empowered communities, but as much as we need new build, we actually need to be dealing with the existing housing stock. But while we are doing new build, we don't want to keep building the sort of housing that normally gets built, and we need to create community housing. But yeah, existing housing stock retrofit is a really big challenge. I don't think I can answer that now.
That's fair. That's fair. There's been a few questions as well around land, and it came up a lot when we were doing the breakout spaces. So this is a question from me really, but how did the projects you've been involved with, how did you source the land for those projects?
For the SNUGs? The
SNUGs and the Community Land Trust.
Yeah, the Community Land Trust has got the sites through the council. So we put a bid in for the Fishponds Road site and won that bid. And then we bought the site for £1, but we had costs associated with redoing the car park at the back, which came to over 100,000 or something. So there was it wasn't quite £1. The 50 home scheme again was from the council. It was a difficult site, and that had to be tendered through a housing association to be able to bid on that site because of the size. The SNUG home, we were trying to get funding. We tried to work with the council. Everything was an uphill battle, seemed to be going on forever and ever. Because it was along the lines of the tiny house movement, there was a lot of negative response to that. There's a lot of funders that were going, we don't want to support tiny house stuff because it doesn't meet the space standards, even though we weren't doing tiny house stuff, but we were working off the back of that. So we ended up finding a private client who really liked what we were doing, who said, I will buy a house with a garden space that you can try and get planning for. If you get planning, then you can build a house there. So we had to take a bit of a gamble with that, and then we got planning off of our own back, with a lot, with a bit of a struggle on that as well. But yeah, that was through a private route. But I'd like to be working with the councils and community organisations, because that really is the pathway to to housing ownership.
Great, thank you. Right, we've got a few more questions coming in. Do we have some time to keep going, Casey?
Yeah, if people are happy to stay on, we can keep running the Zoom.
Right, okay. So who's asked the big question for Kat? How far do you think non-profit sector is from being able to develop on a scale that it can compete with the likes of Redrow?
Oh, good question. We are definitely looking at what comes next for us as Nationwide, which is really exciting, and I don't quite know what that is yet. It's probably not to compete at that level, but I think there is definitely a role for responsible organisations, particularly organisations that have cash on their balance books that can invest in affordable or sustainable housing. That there is a responsibility for people to be, or organisations to be, looking at what more can be done, for sure.
Great, thank you. Where are we? Have you heard of Fairhold, and did you use WikiHouse? That's from Georgina. WikiHouse is a really interesting model, isn't it? Because it's an open source platform for designing and then CNC cutting out framed housing. I had some experience with WikiHouse whilst I was working in practice, actually, and we were running some trials with Bronavon Housing Association to develop apartment types using various modular systems, and WikiHouse was just happened to be one of those. I think the stumbling block there was that because it hadn't been tested as an apartment layout or an apartment system, it was quite difficult to be able to do technical detailing such as soundproofing and the like. So these sorts of systems are always really, really interesting, but it's getting over that first hurdle of actually getting somebody to build one out and being willing to bankroll it and to really trial it.
It's about to be relaunched. So Open Systems Lab know that there's been some difficulties and it's all about to be relaunched. So just a work in progress, really.
It's a really interesting system, I think. Does anybody want to ask a question themselves?
There was a question earlier about the price for the SNUG that came through, which I think, I'm not sure where that is. Yeah, so the SNUG we just built was a trial SNUG. So we were prototyping, and we obviously included loads of training and workshops, which wasn't funded. So it came out more expensive than we hoped. We built it for just under 130,000. That didn't include the land. We hope to be able to bring it down. It's got quite a lot of extras in it, with like the MVHR system. It's got an air source. It's got solar assisted heat pump and solar PV on it as well. And yeah, we're looking at how, and we built it through to completion as well. So I'd like us to be able to get that to a lower price, because again, that's not affordable for lots of people still.
Stephanie asked a question of Aimee earlier in the chat around frustrations with local authorities and residents being blocked from engagement. So many community groups here want to engage, but the planning won't facilitate. I think maybe we would direct Stephanie to attend the meeting on how to get involved in shaping the LDP, which is a session that's coming up this week as well. So if you guys want to share a link there, that would be great. Feel like it's a challenge for young people and affordable homes in local community. Is there a reason? Is this a reason to develop retrofit and extend household builds? And Hope Wales has a vision around this. I think there's a lot of there's always a lot of talk around new build housing, and the legislation that comes through often seems to be around design standards around new builds, but there's retrofit and extending homes should really be a priority for Welsh Government, and seems not to be. Quite often the design codes sort of dictate that you should be able to meet lifetime home standards, but the reality of those standards is that quite often they're not necessarily then being able to be adapted, or it's very challenging to adapt houses to people's needs whilst they're living in them, and I think that's something that's been raised as well. Sorry, I'm answering my own questions. I don't know if anybody else has any questions that they want to raise, or we can wrap up the session. Does Jackson embed an apprenticeship into the scheme?
Yeah, well, we'd like to. We haven't done it so far because the housing, the timescale for the first project wasn't long enough to bring in an apprentice in terms of what, you know, the full gambit of what apprenticeship is. But effectively, all of our volunteers and our community participants were effectively apprentices in a slightly different version. So they'd come when they could come, and you know, some people came for a day a week, some people came for 3 or 4 days a week, and so it was a real mix of skilling up. But I think when we've got another project in the pipeline of 5 houses in an area of Bristol, and I think we'll look at how we can bring some apprenticeships in on that.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie's said a kickstart, and I'm assuming is the kickstart models only applicable in Wales, was my understanding. I don't know if you have those in across the bridge.
Yeah, no, it's a UK-wide. It's Knoll West have got a brilliant kickstart running at the moment. I'm sure Jackson has Knoll West.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, kickstart is the 6-month work experience placement jobs for young people who are on universal credit, and Knoll West are running one. It's just a light touch way of embedding an apprenticeship, but one that could really matter to a young person.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great to get to involve some of these programs. Yeah, so that's Knoll West Media Centre we can make, I presume. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Any more for anyone?
Yeah, just trying to clarify what what was it called again? The tenure blind housing is. Just trying to follow the chat and listen at the same time. It's really challenging. But yeah, Kat, could you do that?
Yeah, sure. And it may be that other people have a different view on this. And I have to say that house building is new to me as well. So if I'm misinterpreting things, let me know. But when we're talking about tenure blind, in this instance, we're talking about homes having parity. So regardless of whether they're affordable homes or market rent, that they're treated the same. And I think you can often see in neighbourhoods where that's not the case, and you can clearly kind of pull out ones that are affordable because they've been built to a different spec or they look different. And we know that at points that causes kind of segregation between people, different groups of people who are living in one area. And what's really important to us at Oakfield is that you're a resident, regardless of how what tenure you've come to Oakfield in. It doesn't matter. Your experience should be the same, and you have the same quality, the same space, and the same access to everything that anybody else does.
Mm.
Yeah,
Which is how I understood it. Mm.
It's really important, actually, and the self-finished models is a nice way of bridging that gap as well, because the Shaldon Road project, 50 homes, 25 of them are affordable rent and 25 are shared ownership. So there's a real mix there, but because everyone's working together, everyone's getting to know each other, and then people can get annoyed at each other by who they are, not because of what their tenure is.
Brilliant.
I just wanted to say as well that there's not to compete with this lovely week that you guys are hosting, there is also, if you've got lots of time in your diaries, there's Bristol. It's annoying that it's on the same week, but Bristol Housing Festival is running this week as well, and there's lots of talks on that around different housing issues. So interplaying the talks through the Wales Cooperative Centre and Bristol Housing Festival, there's probably lots of nourishing information to feed in. And we'll be talking about the self-finish project on Showden Road on Thursday, if anyone's interested in that.
Plug Jackson, and I think Alan's just come back with a counter offer of some evening lectures here. So be sure to check out the rest of the programme. Some of those talks are running into the evening, so not just for us folks skiving off work. So
yeah, take a week off work and just enjoy it all.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hope you've all enjoyed today's session. There's another one this afternoon on inclusion. I'm hoping to attend that myself, so hopefully see you there. And yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Brilliant job, Sean. Thanks a million. Cheers, all.
Throw that out.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Lovely
all.
to see you all.
Thanks
Bye
so
for now.
much.